Professor Cyril Cohen. He's the head of the Laboratory of Immunotherapy at Bar-Ilan University and a member of the Advisory Committee for Clinical Trials of the Corona Vaccine at the Ministry of Health. Thank you, Professor Cohen, for joining us this hour. As you know, for months now, the question on everyone's minds was and still is it really truly safe to reopen schools at this time? Yes, we know the vaccination rate is very high within the general community in Israel, but it seems we don't know yet a lot about how young children especially can contract or distribute the virus. Where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, so hello. So what we know basically is that most of the infections we have seen in school settings were between an adult and the children. I mean, and I have to tell you that if we're talking about the lower grades, like, first, second grade, or even, daycare, etc., the number of infections between kids or from kids to adults was very, very low. And this is not only Israel's experience, but also, I would say, the experience in many countries. Like, for example, there's a huge study in Scotland of something like 300,000 people, which is very interesting. So my take here is that at least, for the grades, until the fifth grade, I think we have no problem in reopening, those grades. Now, we're talking about, kids in high school, which behave more or less like adults, and therefore here I think that we need the benefit of the vaccine in order to prevent infections.
And of course, on the sidelines of this whole conversation about reopening schools, there's been an increasing question, an increasing debate about whether or not to vaccinate children that is under the age of 16. Some health officials say maybe we're headed that way. Of course, Pfizer didn't test it on children under the age of 16. Is this where we're going, though, Professor Cohen, eventually vaccinating the whole population against COVID-19?
Yeah, so this is extremely early. We have to bear in mind that those vaccines are approved under what we call emergency use, meaning that we really need we need a considerable risk in order to allow those vaccines to be administered to population that may benefit from that vaccine. But kids are not in that kind of population. We're talking about, usually a mortality rate very, very low. Thank God. We're talking about, so far in Israel, only 7 children have died from COVID-19. But on the other hand, there is a question of what we call herd immunity. And here, in order to make sure that there is a benefit, okay, not for you, but also for the people around you. So we need more studies, and we do not have, enough studies that show that, for example, the vaccine can prevent transmission. And if yes, to what extent? From the moment we'll have this kind of studies, we'll be able to decide if there is a need also to push for the vaccination of kids. But we will not vaccinate kids without any results from clinical trials. Right now, Pfizer is doing a clinical trial for children between the age of 12 to 16. We expect the results, I would say, within a month or two. After that, and if we have more studies about the transmission or the prevention of transmission by the vaccine, we can start talking about the possibility to immunize children.
As you know, Professor Cohen, the holiday of Passover, the Jewish holiday of Passover, just around the corner last year. It was a very somber holiday, obviously. This time around, travel seems to be more available, certainly to those who were vaccinated. Do you think people, or most people, can celebrate the holiday with their family, including if that means traveling across the country in a more relaxed tone this time around?
Yes, so this is our feeling, I have to tell you. I'll tell you why. I don't want to say too much right now because we are still waiting to see the effects of Purim. But right now, we are quite confident that thanks to the vaccine, there was not a real increase in cases. And on the contrary, we keep seeing a decrease in mortality. We keep seeing a decrease in severe cases. Therefore, we are convinced that the vaccines are really protecting the population. And if all goes well, because, every time we open something, in this country, restaurants, schools, etc., we were used to expect a rise in cases. So if, we do not see a rise in cases. And we have some leeway because, the severe cases and hospitals being overflown are only, I would say, a few weeks after we're seeing a rise in cases. So, Pesach is only 2 weeks away. I want to believe that this year we'll be able to celebrate with our family in a more normal way.
Let's hope to that. Thank you, Professor Cohen, for joining us and for finally a more optimistic view about the pandemic. Thank you.